I love voice, and I feel like right now we talk a lot about voice first companies, but I think maybe even a year from now, the voice part becomes obvious. And the rest of like what you build around it is what's really exciting. In 1999, this might not have been obvious, but by 2002, every company was an internet company, or it feels like we're in the middle of that shift, which is very cool.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Smart Speakers. Today we have Olivia Moore, partner at Andreessen Horowitz and author of an amazing market report on AI voice agents. I love this conversation. I'm sure you will too. Our friends at a16z wanted us to add that the content here is for informational purposes only, shouldn't be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and it isn't directed at any investors or potential investors. Some of the companies mentioned might be portfolio companies of a16z. You can find a list of investments made by a16z at a16z.com/portfolio. All right, let's go. Olivia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this.
Olivia is one of the foremost investors in the voice AI scene, and she is currently a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Is that right? Did I get the title right?
Yes, exactly. And I've been at Andreessen for 4 years. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. 4 years is a good amount of time. You have your undergrad degree in Andreessen now. That's good.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, thanks so much. We're so glad to have you, and we're just going to geek out about voice for the next hour if we can. So first warm-up question. What was your first kind of aha moment with AI? Was it like a particular app, or was it a ChatGPT prompt when ChatGPT came out, or was it something else?
No, it's such a good question. I was thinking about this. So when I was growing up, we had, I don't know if you guys would remember this, but we had Smarter Child, which was that bot that you could talk to on AOL Instant Messenger. So this is
cool.
Yes. And it was like at the time, it felt extremely revolutionary, but now it feels like a V0.0001 of like what we have now with ChatGPT and actual.
How old were you when you were interacting with this bot?
I remember being in middle school and using this. I think it was also a core product for middle schoolers because the most fun thing was to try to get it to like insult someone or say something crazy.
Right.
Exactly.
Roasted.
So you have experience trying to jailbreak these chat solutions?
It was early jailbreaking, yes. And so I feel like actual generative AI, my first aha moment was probably Midjourney, which was quite a bit before ChatGPT. I think it was like summer 2022. So it was at least like 6 or 7 months before. And again, looking back on like early Midjourney, I'm like, wow, this was so early versus even the Midjourney that we have now. But as someone with like no artistic talent who constantly is trying to create things, it was incredible. And then I do fondly remember the days on Twitter where everyone was just like posting ChatGPT prompts, and that alone would be like a viral tweet every time.
It was its own media type, right? Like a ChatGPT screenshot was like its own format for a while, right? It was so novel. Yeah.
Yes. And you could tell like who was on the cutting edge versus who kind of found something 4 weeks later than everyone else, which I was like desperately trying not to be in that category. I did love, as soon as the models went a little bit more multimodal, like you could upload a picture to ChatGPT. I remember putting in like a picture of my fridge and having it tell me like, what should I make for lunch? Like that to me, even though now, do I use that all the time? No, but it felt like magic, I guess. And that's when it really started to click.
That's awesome. That's great. I follow you on Twitter, of course. And your feed is full of the latest and greatest in what's happening on the frontier of AI, both voice AI and generative AI. So highly recommend the follow. We'll put the link in the notes. But what's the coolest non-voice AI thing that you've seen lately?
Yeah, I've been loving all of the things that people are making with all of these new text to web app platforms like, Bolt and Lovable and V0. I don't know if you guys have played around with them, and I know that you guys are actual company builders, but for me as a non-technical person, this really feels like the first wave of products that actually lets anyone build functional software.
Yeah.
Yeah, which to me, it just opens up so many opportunities for people that have cool ideas, but it would probably not be worth the time or effort or to learn how to code and then to build them before. And a lot of them are just fun things. Like my twin sister, Justine, also works here at Andreessen, and we both love to read. So she made this app I think it was on Lovable, where you add your favorite childhood book, and then it like tells you what to read as an adult.
It's amazing.
That's great.
which was really cool. My all-time favorite, though, I'll send you guys the link, but there's this woman who I think she's a designer, and she made this app called Doggy Dex, and it's like a Pokédex where you can take a picture of a dog, and then it scans it, recognizes the dog breed, and then like saves it down in your little Pokédex type experience, so you can try to catch them all.
That's
And
really
the
clever.
amazing.
yeah,
That's so clever. Yeah. And these are enabled by these prompting tools for folks
yeah.
to create software with this. That's amazing.
And the coolest thing is, like, as someone who's used them too, and again, as someone who's not an engineer myself, it will fix its own bugs, which is incredible. So, like, if you get stuck somewhere, it'll solve it for you. But stuff like the Pokédex app for dogs, like, the TAM of that is probably me and the other 1% of dog fanatics. So, like, would it make sense to build that before? I don't know, but I'm so happy that it exists now.
That's a really interesting way to think about it,
Now
too.
that the lift is so low, it's okay. Like you can do it. Maybe you'll find an audience, maybe you won't.
Exactly.
It's worth it.
Yeah, and the parallel way that I think about it is like, what's the TAM of a Suno AI generated song, right?
Yeah.
It's like probably a single digit number of people
Yes.
max,
Yes.
right? Some of them are going to break out or whatever, but it's like so fun and easy to do. Like, our podcast theme song I generated on Suno. It took a few prompts, but it's good.
Yeah.
I've generated a lot of joke songs over the course of my time with that product, which has been a lot of fun. But yeah, it doesn't need to reach 1,000 people. And like making software used to be pretty expensive. Now we're going to be in a place where like software is already getting cheaper, and it's just going to get cheaper and cheaper. It's going to be a pretty fun world to live in.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so interesting to see it being used by everything from like, truly deep technical teams that are maybe trying to prototype something to, on the other end of the spectrum, true consumers who almost want to create an app or a game or something as a meme, to your point, like to send to a
Yeah.
group chat or to send to one other person. It's really kind of widened the scope of what people could do.
Yeah. And I'll say like I didn't really code when I was at Spotify, which was for almost 3 years. So I was like in the product organization there, and coming out and trying to like get back into things, even just having like Copilot baked into VS Code was a total game changer for me. Like, coding is like one of my happy places, but it's hard as a 40-something person to keep up with all the stuff that folks are doing. And this actually makes it a lot easier for me to like stay on the current thing versus to just use the stuff that I used in 2007 and it still works. And so I'm just going to be the grumpy old man using like Rails. But
I'll still be the grumpy old man, but not
yeah, but I'll
about
be
this.
using like, very cool Python libraries, right? Very cool.
Well,
All the kids love
everything is
them.
changing so quickly that some days I'm like, I live in fear of I'm going to be the grumpy old person. And like, I don't know, in 20 years, people are going to be like, you used to do that by hand? Like, you used to do that manually? Like, it's going to be a whole.
Yeah, you remember AOL? How dare you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is going to be in the history books. It probably already is. Yeah.
I've been trying to educate my son on coding. He's 10 and he played around. I don't remember which text like web app he was playing around with, but I feel like he definitely lost a bit of motivation for learning how to code after he experienced it.
That's
Because
interesting.
in his head, I think he's thinking like, well, why do I have to, can I just skip to this thing? Why do I need to write it down? I'm just going to go to this place. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a lost art at some point, I assume.
Yeah. Once the oldest millennials and Gen Zers who remember the days of actually writing code, once we move on, then it's over. It's a lost art.
Yeah, it's like doing
It's going to be like calligraphy.
Yeah, I had to do long division by hand as well.
The
And
worst.
now I think, they don't make you learn how to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's yeah. Well, that's super fun. I'll just like share one more nostalgic bit, which was in the early days of having a sound card on a computer. I don't know, Harish, have you ever had a sound blaster?
Yep. Yeah.
There was Dr. Spatzo, which is
Yep.
like a
I was just
very
thinking about
bad
it. Yeah.
implementation of like an Eliza type chatbot that had like the worst text to speech voice, like just horrendously bad.
Endearingly so. Like you
Yes.
kind of so bad that it was good.
Yeah. I think there is a Dr. Spatzo online somewhere, so you can, basically like be, and this would be so inappropriate now, like all these things are trained not to do this, but it was like a pretend therapist.
Yeah.
But, with like 8 bits of processing power and the worst voice. But it was an eye opener for me as a kid. Once we got it working, so you had to like install the driver in DOS or something, and probably took like 20 minutes. So, Olivia, you spend a lot of your time exploring AI tools and particularly voice AI. How did you get into the voice AI space in the first place?
Yeah. I've been generally interested, I would say, in voice as it relates to consumer tech for a really long time. So I've been in venture for, I mean, close to a decade now. And you both know this, but I went very deep into podcasting as an
Yes.
industry, like met dozens of podcasting startups. I used to go to the annual industry conference for podcasting, big podcast listener. And I
I
feel
didn't know
like,
you were at Podcast Movement. I ever feel like we would have hit you if we were. I've been to
yeah,
like 8 of those in a row. But yeah,
it was a wild ride. And
it was a vibe.
one of my, I feel like, learnings from that was that voice is just so kind of connective and emotional and powerful as a medium. And that's, I think, why you see every celebrity or influencer or brand having a podcast now, because it's like so humanizing in a way that you can't get, I think, with other mediums. And also often for like the speaker, the person creating voice content, it's by far the easiest way to kind of express a thought or an idea, especially if it's complex or dense in terms of information. But before AI, there was like no way to kind of create voice that didn't involve a human being sitting down and saying every word. And also no way to consume voice that didn't require a human being sitting down and listening to every word. So yeah, it was actually one of my colleagues here, Anish Acharya, who leads our consumer team, and he had voice as kind of like his, we do these big idea predictions every year. And he had that for 2024, which was basically like AI would hopefully unlock voice as a medium at scale for consumers to interact with tech. Like this could be, dictation products more traditionally, or something more complex, like a voice assistant or a tutor or something else. Um, and so that's when I first got interested, I would say, in AI and voice. It's been fascinating because I think we've seen some of that play out on the consumer side, which I'd love to talk about. But a lot of the stuff that's really working right now is on the enterprise side in terms of replacing like humans on the phone with tech. And I didn't realize that until a little bit later, but it's been fun to kind of dive into that.
It's super interesting. So it sounds like your route was actually in through voice and not AI.
Yes.
You're coming at it from appreciating, which is very much how Dave and I are approaching it too. As folks who started a company in the podcast space, we love voice, and we kind of like meandered into voice AI from there. Given that you came at it from that way, and I want to get into the market report that you write, and just recently updated because it's such a great view of what's out there with voice AI. Were you always tuned into the conversational aspect of it, or were you kind of starting from a point of like media production, sort of like the one-to-many use case?
It's a good question. And we were early investors in 11 Labs. So we led the Series A and saw kind of the fast inflection of that business. And so I think it was obvious, or it quickly became maybe obvious that like from the media and the creative angle, there would be a real use case here, especially for broadcasts. Very quickly, then there were kind of murmurings of what would become like ChatGPT advanced voice mode, like the consumer companion. I would say the big learning for me that took me a couple months to get and then got me really excited was this idea of kind of like so many businesses are paying humans for these jobs that the humans also hate doing and that are expensive for the businesses and like, the human could be doing something else versus picking up the phone all the time or waiting on hold with an insurance provider if you're in a healthcare office. And so that to me has kind of clicked as like, okay, this makes a lot of sense for voice, and providers like 11 and everything have a big foothold there too. But I would say like the rest of AI, which you've probably seen, the first 18 months was like all consumer creative tool companion stuff. And then the last year or so, we've seen the reliability improve to the point where like actual enterprise applications can be built using AI, which has been awesome.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I want to just quickly kind of return back to this market report. So for anyone who doesn't know or hasn't seen it, y'all should check it out. Olivia writes a market report on voice AI. And I remember noticing it when we started playing around with voice AI in May 2024. To me, it was almost kind of like, a visual guide to what I was thinking in my head. It was like, oh, well, here it is. Like someone is putting a stake in the ground and saying like, this is a thing, it's happening. What kind of led you to publish that report? How did you realize that, this is a real space to explore and for companies to explore.
Totally. We had maybe started seeing like the murmurings of activity in the space. Like our job is to catch interesting people doing interesting things early and hopefully invest in them. So we'd started seeing activity in the market. I do feel like looking back on that report, I felt when we published it that we were probably a little bit early to the market. Like a lot of times a16z puts out a big new thesis or something and it gets a ton of attention and a lot of excitement. And I think it did fine. And people who were deep in the space got it. But for a lot of other people at the time, it was like, no way are we going to be able to put AI on phones for businesses anytime soon. This was like months before advanced voice mode came out. I don't know if you guys remember playing with ChatGPT voice before advanced voice mode, and it would like interrupt you all the time, or you would interrupt it, or it would like, hallucinate. And it was just kind of a tough experience.
Yeah, it's funny that like we're not talking about like ancient history. We're talking about like
6 months
early
ago.
last year. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, 8
Not
months
even a
ago.
year. It's
Yeah, exactly.
crazy.
And really, yeah, so much has changed. And I think, probably a lot of folks listening understand like how that turn taking and like activity detection and knowing when to stop or pause or let the human interrupt the AI. It's all gotten like crazy better, even in the last few months. It continues to get better in the kind of the state of the art. I wouldn't say it's solved, right? Because like there are really smart folks who are going and like, thank goodness, doing all this work for hackers like me to kind of take advantage of and like string together their things. But it really does feel like so much has changed since those first days.
Totally. Yes. And that's a great point because I feel like part of what gave us conviction to pursue the thesis was like we were seeing a lot of work on the model side. And so we had hope that like as the models developed, maybe it would take 3 months, 6 months, a year, we would see things on the application side. And there started to be maybe more of a clear stack of how to build a voice agent. And then we were also starting to see players like Vappy and Bland emerge right around that time that allowed anyone to build a voice bot. And those were like, people were excited about that. Businesses were excited about that, which was like a good sign too.
I feel like the business use case honestly took us a while, at least, to figure out. It's like the first thing, because we had that podcasting lens, it's like, of course, we're going to use this for audio to consume, right? In whatever context, right? Could be translation, could be voicing articles that would be too niche to voice by a human, or doing an audiobook that wouldn't have otherwise gotten produced, something like that. And that's all happening and is going to happen way more as all this stuff gets cheaper. But this simple thing of getting on the phone, like, gosh, there's just huge sectors of the economy which are still so yoked to, the plain old telephone network. Yeah, lots of humans spending lots of hours doing things that are maybe not all that fun, but are like of huge value to the businesses that need them done.
One of probably my biggest aha moment with AI voice in particular was on Vappy. I'm from Oregon. I had to transfer my license to California. I had to call the DMV basically, which is often like a 45-minute exercise. And then unfortunately, once you successfully call the DMV, you make an appointment and you have to go to the DMV, which is even worse. But I built a voice bot on Vappy where I kind of gave it like, my birthday, my license number, whatever, and it called and made an appointment for me, which was amazing.
That's incredible.
Especially listening back to the recording, I was like, this is, like 30 minutes of navigating a phone tree that otherwise I as a human would have done. And so when you think about it for a business that they have probably dozens of people sitting on the phone doing things like that every single day, it's just like so obvious as something that we can kind of fix with AI.
Yeah, there's no Vappy for showing up at the DMV as far as I know. Yeah.
We need one. They need to do that.
I'm sure in Q5 Vappy is going to be launching the person that goes to the DMV for you.
So you published the report in May, and it really wasn't that long ago, but we've talked a little bit about some of the developments since then, but what in your mind are some of the biggest developments in voice AI since you published?
I mean, we talked about the models and how they've evolved. I totally agree that it's not solved yet, but I feel like when we first published the report, like 2 seconds of latency was amazing. And now 2 seconds of latency feels, unusable in many ways. And so I think as a result of kind of, you don't, as a founder building at the application level, you no longer have to invest years and millions of dollars into building the infrastructure yourself. We've seen founders start to build more sophisticated applications using voice as a wedge. And like we have invested in companies and seen companies that are now at millions of dollars in ARR and have like big enterprise contracts with voice first AI products, which I don't know if back last May, I thought that we would even be where we are yet. And so it feels like a lot of course, there's all the model evolutions, but maybe more interestingly, the conversation has moved towards like all of the other things that application layer companies competed on before AI. So like, yes, voice is now a fantastic wedge. Once you get the voice part working, what do you need to integrate with? Who do you sell to? How do you get the conversational flow just right? Where do you head next with the product? I love voice. And I feel like right now we talk a lot about voice first companies, but I think maybe even a year from now, the voice part becomes obvious. And the rest of like what you build around it is what's really exciting, which is great. Like, in 1999, this might not have been obvious, but by 2002, every company was an internet company or same with mobile apps. Like it feels like we're in the middle of that shift, which is very cool.
You keep talking about it as a wedge, which I think of as, kind of a way in the door. Like it's a way to get attention, business interest in what you're doing. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's not the whole story. It's a way in the door. And you still have to build a better business use case around the voice product in order to build a good business.
Yeah, that's our current thinking. And again, like it's still not easy to do at all. Like, especially for an enterprise level voice agent, like you can't spin this up. I have a strong view that, OpenAI is not going to be the voice agent provider for every single vertical, I would say. Like they will supply the models, but they're not going to kind of build the UI for all of these different use cases. And maybe some of the consumer products doing something unique with voice or doing something unique on the model side is going to be the product. But we, for example, are seeing a lot of our companies that didn't start in voice AI adding a voice agent as part of the product. And so I think that just reflects the fact that like, this is now an obviously good idea in many cases. And it should be part of every product, and it should be an obvious part of every product, hopefully, if it's kind of useful to the rest of the product interface. So voice alone maybe won't be the winner, but kind of how you build around that voice wedge will be like what determines the biggest companies here.
It resonates a lot with me and kind of parallels a lot of other LLM unlockable capabilities, right? If voice has gone from being like super difficult and like just not quite usable for business to now like we just expect it to work and you can kind of click a button and get it to work, then I would expect that any application, any suite of products that has like an element where voice would be helpful, we'll bake it in, right? Similar to how like, in 2022, all of a sudden every productivity tool ever had like a little sparkle in the menu bar.
Yes.
And you like sprinkle a little AI in there and who knows what it does. It like does some kind of chat completion on your document or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. But like, I would just expect that voice becomes like a ubiquitous interaction mode for where it makes sense. Right. So the way that we think about it now, which is probably based on your own thinking, so I'm probably just taking your idea and giving it back to you. Voice is a wedge, meaning that like it can get a business excited. Like our experience, like building stuff and getting it in front of businesses is like there's so much more software than there was even 5 years ago, partly because of this low no code stuff, but also just because there's way more people out there building. Every YC batch has X number of startups, which now happens even twice as often as it did, a year ago. And each one of these companies is out there trying to tackle something and is hitting up businesses all the time. And businesses are just getting totally inundated with pitches about software 24/7. They're, I think, logically more skeptical of random people hitting them up saying like, hey, get on a call with me. But the voice demo stuff can demo so well, especially for people that aren't familiar with just how far the tech has gone, that like we found it when we've been exploring different verticals that like it really does get you past that initial barrier of like, which stakeholder at this real estate company or at this e-commerce company really wants to like get on the phone with like yet another founder pitching them like some like pseudo vaporware. It's like, well, the voice makes it concrete, and then they could picture the value that might be coming down the line. But it's not the finish line. Yeah. It's the starting line, really.
I totally agree. I feel like the one thing that I tell every voice agent company building for enterprise is like, make a demo video or create a demo phone line of your bot, like put it on LinkedIn, like a video or something of kind of how it works. Even, my parents, who I'm sending them my voice tweets and demos all the time, they first interacted with advanced voice mode like at Christmas a couple months ago. Like, we're still so early, right? And so someone who's running a business in the Midwest that's 70, the business is 70 years old and they have a ton of other priorities. Like, they just many of them have no kind of idea how good the technology is, because it's shocking even to us that
For sure.
our job is to follow this technology
Right. And we're like, by definition, in a bubble of people who are interested in voice, right?
Yeah.
By by interacting with each other and being part of this like
Yeah.
voice torn of the internet.
Yeah.
And even we are surprised, right? Then therefore,
Totally. So there's a big opportunity to kind of like surprise and delight people who are outside that bubble with voice products. And yeah, to your point, they just demo so well. They're so magical.
yeah, that's awesome. But what kind of markets have you been seeing the most traction in with voice AI? Now, you mentioned that you were thinking consumer originally when you first did your report last year, and now you're kind of seeing much more B2B use cases.
We're seeing a lot of B2B. And this is, again, one of those things that is obvious in retrospect, but maybe took me 6 months to realize, which is like so much of kind of voice activity so far is corresponding to where we saw call center spend. Because the pain point, well, first of all, if you have a call center, you're already paying at least a couple $100,000 a year to have people answering phones or making phone calls. The experience is not good for the customer usually. The experience is not good for you as the person managing a call center. And with the voice agent, in many of these cases, they can get similar results, especially if the calls are kind of straightforward. Mm-hmm. And they can charge you like 20, 30% of what the call center would, and still make like decent margins for themselves. So like financial services in the last 3-4 months, we've seen kind of an explosion of voice agent companies. Healthcare is a big one. The category that has a lot of call center spend, or that I want to see happen with voice agents, is government. Like, please, again, to get back to the DMV example, we need people to build better ways to interact with government services on the phone.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Tough sales cycle.
I know.
Hopefully there are founders out there who have some experience on how to crack the nut on like getting in the government procurement process, and then can take some of their learnings from Olivia's voice market posts, plus this amazing Smart Speakers podcast. And there you go.
Totally.
100 new startups bloom. We're done.
Fully behind you on this. So as a consumer, I desperately need this. It has, but I think outside the call center stuff, there's a couple maybe less obvious markets where we've seen pull. And one example, which I wrote about recently, would be recruiting. So this is another category where I'm like, there's no way that AI is going to be able to conduct a job, like do a job interview with a human, where the AI is interviewing the human. Like, I thought this would be kind of a late adopter market because it feels so sensitive. But again, what I learned is like there's 43 publicly traded companies that are just staffing agencies. And so all they do is do these kind of like first, second, third screening calls with people and then refer them to the end employer. And in many cases, like AI can do this quite a bit better, or at least do that first or second call a lot better. And the candidates don't mind it, because then they can interview, I don't know, at 10 p.m. once they finish their current job, so they don't have to step out in the middle of the day. We hear from a lot of staffing agencies who are buying voice AI, like the candidates love it because the voice agent actually engages with what they're saying and they're interested and they're excited and they're not, biased towards one type of a candidate or another. So we try to stay open-minded of like where our customers buying voice versus like, where we want to see customers buying voice. And that would be one interesting example.
Right. So it's almost kind of, you look for where the activity is.
Yes.
And then you try to ask yourself if there is sort of a swap in replacement.
Yeah.
Where maybe an AI could do the job. I'll add that I think one thing that we hear from customers in our exploration, or one thing that we, frankly try to sell on, is the AI is not going to get tired. You kind of mentioned it with interviewing, right? Like, so happy that someone's listening to you. The AI is going to be unfailingly empathetic to the extent that it can be.
Yes.
It's not going to get frustrated and, kind of like start going into, dark patterns or anything like that. Like, it's just going to be always on and always in the same mode. One way that we've been thinking about it is it's sort of like a ultimately customizable API of last resort into your business. And you can present it through voice, and everyone knows how to talk on the phone. So it creates kind of a wonderful interface for the human world.
Totally. I love that metaphor. And yeah, it makes me think even too, like a lot of the pull that we're seeing in financial services, for example, there's all of these compliance use cases where a human being can have a bad day and like say something off
Right.
script, and it can cost a lot of money for the end customer to have kind of a human agent having a bad day. And with a voice agent, you can program it to stay within the bounds or to end the conversation
Yes.
if something bad is happening. And that's something that you could never kind of do before.
Yeah, and I would reiterate, it's also like it can be a better. I think a lot of times I've made this assumption that like maybe it's not going to be worse. Like, oh, like what
Yeah.
job candidate is going to want to talk to an AI interviewer? But like talking to a human interviewer can be like such a rough, like stressful experience. Having done, we interviewed hundreds of people at AngelList and, for our last company, and like it's a lot for both sides, right? And I was always like trying to be super positive and putting a good picture out for the company. But like, ultimately maybe you're doing a code screen with someone and they're totally biffing like fizz buzz, right? It's tough to like, you have to really be on your game to like keep a straight face. And maybe if I hadn't had lunch yet, I wouldn't have done as good of a job. And yeah, it can feel better for the candidate to be like, okay, this is less pressure. If I mess this up, okay, I screwed up in front of an AI. What's the big deal? It's not like embarrassing in the same way. And yeah, you're not going to get judged in the same way. I remember when we were doing my second startup, which was a total fail, but we were trying to basically get acqui-hired at the end, and did a call with like an interviewer, one of the corp dev departments that was going to like, potentially look at our company. Yeah. And I think there was like some kind of miscommunication. The interviewer basically gave me like a senior Java backend engineer interview. And I was like, I don't know Java. It's like the one language I've like never even touched in my life. And I just like felt terrible. And I kept trying to say like, I think there's some kind of like mistake. Like this isn't like going well. And he's like, well, you're just going to have to do your best. And I was like, this is maybe the worst hour of my entire career.
No.
Is like trying to like my company is failing. And I really can't write this code, anyway. So like, I think it can be a better experience in ways that are unexpected for the human on the call. Like I think often we assume it would be worse, but in many cases it can end up being better.
And two, it's not always about like replacing a human being with an AI. But for example, that interviewer who spent an hour talking to you about Java, he or she could have spent that hour instead, nurturing candidates for some net new role that they were hiring. Right. We hear a lot from businesses that they're often not like firing, a whole staff thanks to AI, but they're instead like letting those people do things that are more suited to their skill sets and interests and can like generate more revenue for the business and put them on a more exciting path, which is cool to see too.
We've heard some predictions from folks that call centers it's not that they'll go away, but they may become places where calls are monitored as opposed to generated.
Yep.
Which I think is super interesting, right? Like you're still going to need some humans kind of at the wheel at some level. And there's still a massive amount of calls to be monitoring, and it might just
maybe even
evolve.
More calls if they become cheaper to generate or whatever, right? That way there might actually be an increase in traffic. Exactly. And the humans are just, the coordinators versus the ones actually acting as the API interface.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
So you talked a bit about how you were surprised that recruiting ended up actually being kind of a good use for voice AI. Do you have any ideas or sort of like patterns as to what is actually not a great place to apply voice AI right now, or sort of bad areas to look right now?
Yes, we try not to be like, too prescriptive here, as I feel like from the investor side, especially, we're not the people in the arena every day building the companies, and we're often wrong. But I would say we've maybe generated some early theories or ideas about where it's maybe easier or harder to generate revenue with a voice product. I would say if there's not some sort of existing and obvious spend that you can go into these businesses with and say, hey, I'm going to help you, cut this spend, reallocate these people to another role or to something that's more interesting. It's tough. And in general, I would say if you're selling into a customer that's not already spending, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000 a month on human beings answering phones or making calls, it's tricky. Just because even if the voice AI is as good as a human, they still probably only want to pay 20 or 30% of what they're,
Yeah.
paying a human. And so you kind of want to get into that at least 1 or 2K per month per customer so that you can get upwards of a 10K ACV and like support like a sales team and onboarding and integrations and all of that.
The way I think about it, that is, basically, are you going to try to convince them that voice is worth investing in the first place and then convince them that your solution is the solution for their problem? Or is it, do they already have this problem and you're going to give them like a better solution at a better price? Like that's a very different pitch, right?
Totally. Because they're not, enamored by the technology alone in the same way that like we
Right.
might be.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're geeking out over activity detection. They are not, right?
Totally. Yeah. They just love the idea of like, doing something cheaper and then increasing the margins on their business or being able to
Yeah.
do it more efficiently.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's one where it gets a little tricky. And we see this a lot with some kind of small business categories of voice agents. One question that we ask ourselves is like, if you're not generating a ton of money from the calls alone, are you able to use the fact that you're kind of making and taking all the calls as a wedge to build downstream software and either automate more things that humans are doing now or kind of build a better version of software that they're already paying for? And I would say like it's still up in the air. I'm sure that there is a category of small businesses that probably whatever voice agent UI OpenAI releases in the next 2 or 3 years will be enough for them. Because like they just need a basic receptionist. The calls are not that complicated. They're just booking appointments and they don't pay for a lot of other software. But in these categories where the calls are more complex, transactions are happening, and not only that, but the calls are generating data that there's other things to then do with, like update a CRM or send out a shipment. Like that's where we see, I think, kind of a lot of real opportunity for voice agents.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Is there, and I think maybe this would be kind of like putting on a different hat than the one you wear, is there a bear case for the voice AI market? Is there a world in which this kind of activity evaporates, or maybe there's not a place for new startups to explore?
Yeah. I think there's always these always risks, and in this case, there's definitely a couple that I maybe think about a lot. So one maybe bear case would just be that the model companies themselves kind of take all the alpha. Like, what if OpenAI again builds a voice agent platform, or I don't know, Anthropic or someone else, and then you don't need all of these maybe vertically oriented platforms that are building voice for X or Y industry. And again, I think my view is they probably will have some platform someday, and it'll probably be good for some amount of like SMB doing, needing a general receptionist, but it's probably not going to be enough to serve like the $10 billion investment bank that needs extremely complex workflows and every call needs to be compliant and things like that. I would say the other maybe bear case gets back to what we talked about earlier, which is like, will the incumbents just add voice and kind of crowd out all the startups, or at least put pricing pressure on what startups could charge? And I think we've seen this happen already with like voice scribes in healthcare, where like
Yeah.
every EHR is kind of adding that. I mean, my thinking on this now is like, there's definitely a couple categories where a really modern, fast moving incumbent is either going to kind of like pick a startup to king make as their partner, or maybe they would do it themselves. But in general, I think we kind of overestimate like how willing and able these big sleepy companies are, even if they're only 10 years old, to kind of build new tech. Like it's so different to start the company in 2024 and build in an AI native way than start in 2014 and kind of add voice to it.
I mean, we even talked to a voice founder that started his company in 2022 and built a lot of their voice pipeline themselves. And now they're swapping out, the voice. Now there's like a lot of off the shelf voice pipeline frameworks, even if you're like hosting it yourself, let alone hosting it on like Vappy or something. It's changed even from a year ago, a year and a half ago, right? So like think about like what the incumbent's infrastructure looks like and the assumptions that are baked into the architecture of, the legacy web app and legacy iOS and Android app that they also have to support. It's not as simple as like putting the little sparkles in the menu bar maybe. Yeah, that totally resonates with me.
Yeah. I feel like pivoting a big company is kind of like moving a big ship,
Yeah.
where it's just like the infrastructure required to turn it even 10 degrees versus like if you have a canoe or something, you
Yes.
can just kind of flip it around extremely
Yes.
quickly.
Yeah, these what you're talking about feel like traits of any market, not just voice AI. There's always kind of the question of, are the big incumbents going to go after it? Is that going to kill my business? I remember the first company that I was at was an electronic parts search engine. And at the time, this was many years ago, the off the cuff advice we'd get from folks was, well, isn't Google just going to take that market? And I think
Classic
that's,
question.
and then at some point it was also like, isn't Amazon going to take this market? And the reality is like they both had chunks of the market, and it was just the chunks of the market that they could reasonably address. But they weren't going to go deep the way that we were going to go deep, and that was always sort of a competitive advantage. So it feels less about voice AI specifically, but about like kind of any new tech that startups are using to try to make a name for themselves.
And
Fully.
voice AI to me feels like it is moving just so damn fast, right? Maybe it's a confirmation bias or something because I spend so much time thinking about it, but it does feel like every week or two, there's just like some new demo, some new capability, some new real-time API. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out with the big folks versus the new entrants. Obviously, we're a little bit biased here
Yeah.
towards the new entrants. But hey, if you're at Google and working on voice AI, we would be happy to talk to you also. We will not disinvite you to the show. What do you think are the big kind of like open problems or open questions for voice tech right now?
Yeah. This actually relates to the kind of incumbents and what is OpenAI going to do question, which is like, I think we probably get to a world where, the 10 to 30% of fairly easy calls, anyone will be able to easily add capability to do that. I think what we're starting to see is a lot of end businesses say, even, I don't know, HVAC service booking, they'll say right now, like, AI can probably credibly handle 30-40% of my calls, but a shockingly high number of calls require some sort of negotiation, some sort of like sales charm, like maybe they're paying for the lead and so they want to, put a human on it to make sure it's going well. Like there's all of these kind of longer tail examples that actually amass into a pretty big percentage of call volume where for some reason the business customer doesn't trust voice AI to do it yet. And so I think this is probably both developments to come on the model side, but also developments on kind of like the workflow and application UI side to make it so that AI can handle a negotiation, a sales process, like something that feels a little bit more sensitive or emotionally charged. And that's really exciting because I think startups will invest in that for their vertical and like the big platforms won't. So like there's huge, huge opportunity there.
When we were exploring real estate as a vertical for a while, and a lot of times people are paying for these leads. And so it's not just, okay, I've got on the phone and I have like a single task that I'm going to do. It's like, okay, well, maybe you get on the phone with the customer for you have one task that you think you're doing.
Yes.
They filled out a form online and they said they're interested in buying a house, but maybe it turns out it's more important that they are selling their house or their mom is selling their house. And like, that's actually like the much higher value part of the transaction. And if you're not alert and aware of that, then, a business owner would be upset about like missing out on that. And so it does feel like it's not like out of the question that the AI could get there, but it's not going to be an out of the box thing. You have to kind of understand what the goals of the business are, what the usual flows are, what the lead source is, what kind of lead it is, get that customer data. It'll be an exciting, I think a lot of the stuff, I mean, I'm not hesitate to make like a super deep projection here, but like, it feels like this year you'll probably see a lot of that stuff happening with particular verticals where like it just gets better and can replace more of the kind of, the fuzzier parts of that business.
I'm super excited about that. The other thing that I hear about all the time from voice founders is pricing. I think a lot of companies started pricing how the models are pricing, which is like per minute, which is obvious. And then you can kind of align your margins and everything. But customers are getting smarter about that. Like they're like, hey, we know the models are cheaper now. Or maybe as these spaces get more crowded, if you price per minute, it's kind of easy for a competitor to come in and like undercut you.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing companies experiment with like no price per minute or fixed fee for X number of calls and then some sort of platform fee or integration. I met a voice company the other day that actually is able to take a % of successful
I was going
transactions.
to ask.
That's awesome.
That seems like a great place to be in.
So that is, to me, like another really interesting and cool maybe vector that we'll see development on this year. And then there's tons of other things like, does it make sense to do all phone calls for a business or start with one type of call and then do all the texts and emails and other kind of modalities of communications that come out of that call? Where is it important to have more industry expertise versus technical expertise if you're building a vertical voice agent? It's going to be an exciting year, I think, because there's a lot of things slow to figure out, but a lot of stuff that's working too.
I totally agree with that. And it's actually kind of surprising to us, having built, for the verticals we've been exploring, that the multimodal isn't like, voice AI is a thing, but like multimodal isn't like really an off the shelf thing where like, of course, if you email the company, it should have the same kind of like context and capabilities that it would have if you called the voice AI, right? But that's just not really on the table, at least like in a super widespread way yet. But it's going to make a lot of sense. And also it's going to improve all of our customer interactions, hopefully, and maybe our government interactions over time, if we are lucky at all. And then, it'll get a little bit easier to, for these kind of like frustrating experiences that we experience on a regular basis, things will get better for us as consumers and also better for the businesses.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. You mentioned at the top of the call that you've worked alongside your twin sister for 4 years at Andreessen and also at your previous job as well, right?
Yes. And at our previous job before that and before that.
And you went to school together also, is that true? What's that like? I mean, like, it seems like that's a long period of time to be working so closely with somebody that you're, obviously like very close to in a family way and an emotional way. How does that translate into your work and what's that like on a day-to-day basis?
It's really nice. I think we've evolved it over the years. Like when we were, for example, we went to Stanford together. We built a startup incubator together, which was really fun and kind of an adventure. And there was a time when I think like our skill sets and our strengths and everything were a lot more comparable. And so one of us would be almost like a substitute or an extra pair of hands for the other. And then as we've kind of over the past decade or more evolved in our careers, there are actually so many things now that like she does really well that I don't do well, or vice versa, maybe. And also maybe you would say maybe not.
She's not here yet, so we're not going to speak for her, but.
And also things that like we disagree on a lot. I think it is helpful in that we both kind of agree on the fundamentals of most things. And we're also able to be incredibly honest with each other, which is so important in a business like this, but also really hard because if you're brutally honest with someone and you don't have an incredibly close relationship, it can get a little dicey, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's nice, especially as we've kind of gotten, more senior in our careers, to have someone that will just tell it to you straight. And, because they know that, we're going to be friends and we're going to be colleagues and everything forever. And we have kind of like an unbreakable bond in that way. So actually we often focus on completely different things now. Like if I'm on even 1 or 2 pitches with her in a week, that's a lot. Like we're focused on different areas, but it's like very nice to be able to kind of come back to that level of support and have an extra set of eyes on something if I need to. And she helps with a lot of my tweets because she's very good at Twitter. So that
sounds amazing.
Yes.
If only we could all have a work partner like this.
What do you mean, Dave? What do you mean?
Oh, nothing, Harish. You're very supportive and your tweets are great, I think. I remember the last time you tweeted in 2007, I remember it being really good. Do you recall, like, has there been a recent disagreement that you can talk about, or is it just kind of like you guys are just kind of off in your different zones now? I mean, you're both on the consumer team, Andreessen?
Yeah. So we both do a lot of consumer investments. We're both on what we call like the AI applications team, which basically means we look at like consumer, prosumer, enterprise applications of AI. Justine spends actually a lot more time as well with our infrastructure team too, which does like the model layer investments. And so maybe I won't name names, but like some of our disagreements can be like she has a deeper understanding of some of the kind of moats and advantages of like investing a lot of money into a model layer company and kind of she'll be deeper in that than I ever will, right? And then if I'm looking at kind of a vertical SaaS voice company, in some cases it maybe feels like less of a big swing to her. She's like, how much alpha is there really? So it's kind of it's a good tension, I guess, and that we come at it almost from different angles of the stack now at this
That's
point, and
cool.
we can kind of push each other
Is
in fun ways.
is how much alpha is there really? Is that kind of like the playground taunt now? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We've evolved from whatever we were yelling at each other on the actual frame.
I love it. Well, it sounds amazing. I mean, just to be able to work so closely with your sister for such a long time. I mean, it really speaks to, the bond that you all have, which is super cool. As we're kind of wrapping up on our side here, can you share 3 things that you've been really into lately? It could be like apps or books or podcasts or anything. It doesn't have to be voice related.
Totally. I have been playing around a lot with ChatGPT Operator. I mean, just to be clear, ideally, the version of Operator we have in 6 months is like either just baked into core ChatGPT or baked into whatever other product. Like, I don't know if it's interesting as a standalone product in even a year from now, but it's so fun to just see the first kind of fully functional browser agent and what it could do. Like, I have this bill that I've had to pay forever for some, I don't know, I think I went over the Golden Gate Bridge without my Easy Pass or something.
Oh, no.
And
$300.
exactly.
Another
Yeah.
DMV adjacent
Yeah,
related.
it sounds like you have a lot of DMV issues here,
Yeah,
Olivia. We could
no,
take this
totally.
offline, but no.
It is a liability for me to own a car at this point. But I took a picture of the bill and it was able to extract like, here's a website to pay, here's the citation number, here's the license plate, and it went and filled that all in for me.
Wow.
And then it would not enter my credit card number for me. I had to do that myself, which, yeah. So the safetyist won that one, but I get why they
Touching you from yourself,
Exactly.
and they don't want to charge like all of your $300 tools to your credit card all at once.
But that was just like such a fun and cool thing, and I just can't wait. The fact that that exists now means that like that model or the computer use model or some other browser model will probably be an API a couple months from now, and then apps companies will be building on top of it. So I can't wait for that. The second thing would be I've been very into LoRa training recently, which is like where you upload pictures of a person or an animal or an object and you can generate net new images. And we have a portfolio company named Kriya where you can do this. It gets back to our earlier comment about kind of like meme songs or meme apps. Like these personalized LoRas are such good fodder for like group chats. And
for sure,
like I have a LoRa at this point of like all my friends, all their pets. Like whenever something crazy happens, I can create like a fun image and send it over and people are amazed.
That's cool. I mean, it's like if Bitmoji is like still popular, like my 9-year-old loves Bitmoji. It's like this is like infinite Bitmoji with like totally customized to your friends, right?
Exactly. It's really cool, especially when you can make them into videos. It's just like wild.
Yeah.
And then last thing, maybe this is just a fun one. I've been super into space recently, and specifically books about space. So like, I read Mercury Rising, which is about John Glenn. I read The New Guys, which was about like the 78 NASA class that had Sally Ride and a bunch of other amazing astronauts. I read Shoot the Moon, which was about Apollo 11. So I feel like my generation, because I'm 30 now, but my generation was like post-space being cool.
Yeah.
And I never got to like really experience that. And now it's in again. So I'm like, now we might finally go to Mars. So it's been super fun to learn about all the history there and get into it.
That's awesome. Yeah, Harish has recommended, I think, 2 out of those 2 books on that list to me. Isn't that right? Or
I have spent time obsessed with space. I don't know that I am right now, but love reading about it. Yeah, it's just so it's so epic in a way that almost no part of my life is. And it's just like so hard to imagine that people lived those lives and did those things.
The Challenger book by Adam Higginbotham is on my list. I might read it on vacation next week. It's like, a little bit of the tougher side of like the stakes are very real in space. I can't believe that all the early space missions went up with like, 8-bit computers. And like, meanwhile, like my like supercomputer can't even like record a meeting without like falling over. And then, these guys like went around the moon. What are you kidding me? But it is like, there's an inherent drama there. Yeah. Because the stakes are so high. And voice AI is also exciting, maybe not quite as exciting as going to space, but I think very epic. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Olivia, thanks so much for chatting with us for so much time. Really appreciate it. We're going to drop links to all of Olivia's socials and her Voice AI market report, but really appreciate you coming on Smart Speakers. You're certainly a very smart speaker, and we're glad to have spent the time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. This was so fun. And yeah, I love talking about all things voice.
Thanks again for listening to Smart Speakers, and thanks again to Olivia for being on the show. You should follow her on X at @OMoreTweets and read her Voice AI Agent report, which we'll link in the show notes. As always, you can find us at smartspeakers.fm. We'd love to hear what you think about the show and who else we should be interviewing. Thanks so much for listening. Have a good one.